I received the title of top cop while working for our local police department. I was new to this department. All the other officers were old-timers and largely adhered to their customs. They were a great group of guys, and they all tried their best to help me settle in, but they all preferred to do things the old way. I used to take a couple of case files home with me and work on them in my free time. I was taking a criminology course offered at a state college 40 miles south of us. I used the new techniques I was learning to get back to those old things. As luck would have it, in my first 6 months of service, I solved 4 unsolved cases. It was a positive thing. The downside was that Stella spent 2 evenings a week away from me while I was in class, but she was a very caring wife. She knew that what I was learning now would pay off handsomely in the future. She was a nurse at our local hospital. She was able to rearrange her schedule to maximize our time together. We both came from middle-class families. We have already thought through everything about our future. We'll buy a house with a small plot of land so we can garden, have horses, and maybe some other kind of livestock. We will have 2 or 3 children, but this will happen after we spend a few years together, just the 2 of us. It was a great plan. This was our dream. Long story short, these 4 cold cases I solved brought me to the attention of Sheriff Jim Stevenson. I found myself sitting in his office listening to an amazing proposal. He wanted me to work with his investigative team. For all intents and purposes, I would be a detective. The downside was that I would have to report to his office, located in the center of the county. Instead of 11 miles commuting back and forth to work, I have to travel 27 miles. The upside was more money and my own patrol car to take home every night. I was also allowed to ride it to criminology classes. The clincher was that they said they would pay me for the time I spent in the class and pay my tuition. Needless to say, as much as I hated leaving all my colleagues and friends behind on the local police force, the sheriff made me an offer I couldn't refuse. The atmosphere in the district center could only be described as competitive. There was no doubt that my rapid rise had angered at least a few of my colleagues. I tried to keep a low profile, working harder than ever. Most of my time was spent researching unsolved cases. As before, I continued to work on these things at home. I usually read everything our office has available on a particular case, memorizing as much as possible. Then, when I had some time or when an idea occurred to me, I would enter it into my evidence app. At the end of the day, I would transfer my thoughts to a USB drive to take with me to work the next day. It was this routine that led to everything changing. It started on Wednesday morning when I couldn't find my flash drive. I looked everywhere. No flash drive. I was sure I had left it on my desk, but there was nothing there. And then it dawned on me. It was probably accidentally pushed off the table and fell into the trash can. The trash can was empty. Then I remembered that Stella had taken the white plastic bag of trash into the trash last night. She had already left for work, so I had to dig through the trash to find my missing flash drive. I began the painstaking work of parsing the packages. Finally, 3 rows deep, I found a white bag inside a black bag. What the heck? Why did she put one into the other? Why not just throw the bag on top? The good news is that my flash drive was there. The bad news is that there was more to it. That sunny Wednesday morning, that day of turning point, became one of the darkest days of my life. After I put the flash drive in my pocket, I noticed a clear sandwich bag underneath. In the sandwich bag, I found 6 small packets, better known as condoms. All of them were filled with an easily recognizable white substance. It didn't take a detective to realize that this was an important piece of evidence. A laboratory is not required to identify white matter. It doesn't take long for a trusting husband to realize that his marriage and life as he knows it is probably finished. I unlocked my squad car and placed the bag of condoms in the evidence cooler. Then I began to think about my next step. My first instinct was immediate confrontation. But Stella could have simply denied everything. She might say, for example, that the neighborhood boys were probably using our garbage can for nefarious purposes. I quickly determined that I would need to use a more reliable method. I need to use professional surveillance equipment located in my home. This will allow me to determine if this was a one-off or an ongoing affair. I wasn't even sure if novel was the right word. With 6 full condoms, would orgy be a better word? Installing the appropriate equipment will allow me to determine not only the situation, but possibly also the participants. I will be able to conduct DNA analysis of the contents of condoms if the need arises. I was making a list of things I would need to do when my phone rang. Assistant Sheriff Jake Robbins. It was the boss, Sheriff Stevenson, calling to tell me about a possible breakthrough in one of our cold cases. He told me that Luke found Alice, Reynolds' car on his property. Sheriff Stevenson asked me to get there as soon as possible. He stated that he was putting me in charge of this newly opened cold case that had suddenly become hot. This was the first time in the 2 years of my new job that I became the lead investigator on a case. I was honored that the boss chose me to handle such a complex and well-known case. As I headed to the ranch, my thoughts about condoms were replaced by memories of the day Luke called me out of the blue. He wanted to discuss the murder of Holly Sherman, which was another one of our unsolved cases. I made an appointment with him for later that day. This turned out to be very successful. He stunned me with his first sentence. He reported that he had engaged in a foursome with Holly Sherman at her home. I had to tread carefully. Sexual activity, no matter how depraved, is usually not a crime. I asked him if it was her consent. He said she was a willing participant at first, but became less active as events progressed. Having said this, he assured me that she never asked them to stop or even pause. Over time, she simply lost her enthusiasm. He went on to say that it bothered him so much that he finally confessed everything to his brother, who was a minister of the local church. His brother advised him to find me and tell me everything. I told him I appreciated the information, but nothing he admitted to was illegal, until she was forced to have sex against her will. That's when he told me that the other two members were Stephen Barber and Bill Raymore. Both Luke and Bill were there at Stephen's invitation. I thought it was a little strange that Stephen, who was supposed to be Holly's boyfriend, initiated such an act, but it wasn't a crime either. I needed to get to the bottom of the situation, so I asked Luke if he was involved in Holly's poisoning. He said he would never do that. I asked him if he suspected that other participants might have been involved in her murder. He stated that he had no reason to think so. At that moment, I decided that this was all just an attempt by Luke to clear his conscience and would not have much impact on our cold case. So, it was an interesting conversation, but it didn't help us understand Holly's murder yet. I interviewed Stephen, Holly's boyfriend, early on in the case and ruled him out. I also understood that although Luke felt bad about what happened, it didn't make him a suspect. All I had to check was another member, Bill Raymore. I made a mental note to check on it the next day. I spent a thorough check on Mr. Raymore. Other than some evidence that he wasn't a good guy, there was nothing to convict him of murder. So I started checking on his wife, Ellie Raymore, and found a clue. Before they moved here a year ago, she worked for a chemical company on the Gulf Coast. After several phone conversations with managers and supervisors at the plant where she worked, I had a suspect. She had access to the very chemical that the medical examiner determined to be the cause of Holly's death. Managers at the chemical plant said that while they kept a close eye on products that could be used recreationally, they weren't as concerned about toxic byproducts as the one I asked about. Just 3 days after my visit with Luke, I was part of the team sent to retrieve Ellie Raymore. We came prepared with a search warrant for her home. She met us at the door when I showed my badge and told her that we were accusing her of killing Holly Sherman. She surprised us all. "I was wondering when you idiots would realize this," she grinned. "Just let me say this, that smug bitch deserved what she got." So, thanks to my visit to Luke Young, we unfrozen the case. Most of the credit went to me, but it really belonged to Luke. Now I'm getting ready to talk to Luke again. This is about another unsolved case. This is probably the most talked about case we've ever had. The thing is that an elderly woman named Alice Reynolds and a young man named Jerry Gibson disappeared on the same evening. She was his teacher in a special program designed to teach mentally retarded young men how to cope with the responsibilities of being the man of the house. Her teaching took place in the residence she shared with her husband, Alan. At that time, there were many rumors that a student and his teacher disappeared on the same day. Did they have a romantic relationship? Did they go somewhere to be together, or was it just a super weird coincidence? These questions were never answered, and the case was soon closed. Today may mark a new start in solving this mystery. Wouldn't it be great if Luke could contribute to this cause like he did with Holly Sherman? If so, we should consider placing him on staff. As I drove up to Luke's house, the forensics cars pulled up from the other direction. Luke came out to meet us. As we shook hands, the leader of the forensic team asked if it was easy to get to the car. Luke told them where it was hidden. Hidden in plain sight. He reminded us that the multi-car dealership he now ran had been in the family for many years. Until the recent expansion, it was a Ford agency. Over the years, they have exchanged many cars. They sold some of their used cars and sent some to auction, but many of them ended up in a car graveyard in the middle of their ranch. Quite often, collectors came out to look at these cars. It was one of those collectors who spotted a nearly new car that was among all these classic cars. He asked how much they were asking for this 2-year-old white Buick. Luke went to take a look. The doors were locked, but the license plates were still there. He quickly called, asked a question, and was defeated. He made more than one call to the sheriff. After listening to Luke's story, we followed him to the car. 10 minutes after we got to the car, forensic scientists opened the doors and trunk. They found a couple of empty drink cups in holders, but there appeared to be little evidence in the car. There was no blood or other significant findings. The most important thing is that there were no bodies there. I asked Luke to think of a place on the ranch where we could hide the bodies. He searched his memory for a couple of minutes. Then his eyes lit up as he remembered that there was an old hand-dug well nearby. Forensic scientists soon determined that the water in the well was at least 12 feet deep. They hung the camera in the well. The operator studied the picture through an optical sight. After a few minutes of analysis, he turned to us and said, "We have 2 bodies there." I immediately called my boss with the news. He congratulated us and said he would make some calls. He needed to assemble a team to retrieve the bodies. Hopefully they will be there by tomorrow. He told me to report to the ranch tomorrow at dawn. The team will report to me as soon as they arrive. I thanked him for trusting me. Crime scene tape was wrapped around the well and the car before we drove home. I was looking forward to a very busy day tomorrow, but soon my thoughts returned to the 6 condoms. Since my duties for the day were completed, I had 2 extra hours to go shopping. On the way home, I stopped at an electronics store. I purchased 4 smoke detectors equipped with audio-video. They looked exactly like the ones installed in our house. I also had a base station to record readings from these devices. I arrived home more than an hour before Stella was due to return, and all the devices were already in place when she arrived. I'll soon find out the answer to the riddle of the 6 condoms. It could be nothing, or it could be the end of my marriage. When Stella returned home, I covered up my concerns about condoms by explaining that I had been assigned as lead detective on a newly opened case in which a teacher and her student. Stella seemed very interested in everything that happened at the ranch. I watched her carefully all evening, but did not see anything unusual in her behavior. She was relaxed, happy, and loving. She showed no signs of guilt or remorse. That evening, I spent several hours refreshing my memory about the case of Alice and Jerry. I always suspected that they had a sexual relationship. When I was reading the case file, I found a note from a school administrator that mentioned that Jerry had asked Alice to help him with issues related to dating girls. I immediately realized that he had led her into dangerous territory. After I digested every piece of evidence in the file, I came to the conclusion that Alice had finally realized that she was in too deep with Jerry. He turned the teacher-student relationship into a sexual relationship. This became a danger to her entire family if it ever became known. She knew what she had to do, and she did it. When it was time to go to bed, I was determined to make love to Stella. I needed to see how she would react to me. It turned out that she didn't like it very much. Her thoughts seemed to be elsewhere. I'm sure she was faking her orgasm. She made the right sounds and said the right words, but her body spoke differently. The slight pressure on me that I usually felt when she orgasmed was missing. In addition, Her breathing did not follow the usual rhythm during orgasm. Her actions confirmed my suspicions. But now there were hidden devices that would tell the whole story. Now that I think about it, her ardor seemed to be decreasing over the course of a month or so. Until now, I didn't attach much importance to this. These condoms put me on high alert. I decided to make this a double night. We haven't gone there twice lately, but I wanted to see if she would turn me down. She didn't, but her participation in that second event was even more lackluster than her first performance. Usually we enjoyed at least 15 minutes of afterglow, but this time, after I shot my pack a second time, I simply walked out, jumped out of bed, and headed to the bathroom. Returning to bed, I turned my back to her. She reached out to me, but I didn't answer. I spent Thursday watching the assembled team collect the bodies, which they took to the lab to complete the identification process. I spoke to the forensics team at length, and they were convinced it was a murder-suicide situation. We discussed this and all other aspects of the matter. It's finally over. I got home about an hour late that evening because I had a few reports to file and a pre-press briefing to attend. The boss gave me the day off as a reward for solving the case. When I got home that evening, I explained to Stella what I had been doing all day, but I didn't tell her about the extra day off. I intended to take it tomorrow and use it to work on solving a case that was happening in my own home. When it was time to go to bed, I tried to pick up where we left off the night before. To my surprise, Stella asked for time off, saying that she was not in the mood. This made my head spin wheels. Was she not in the mood because she was already satiated after another orgy this morning? Will I find another package of condoms? The next morning after Stella left, I made one trip to the trash can. This time, not a single condom. Then I began to look at what happened in our house yesterday, that is, on Thursday. There was a short recording made by a device in the living room and a longer one made by a similar device in the guest bedroom. I sat down and watched my marriage fall apart. The video started out showing the living room. The first thing that sparked interest was when Stella opened the door a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She let a couple of guys in, kissing them as they entered. I was able to identify the guys immediately. They visited us in the summer. Then she introduced them to me, and we spent some time in relaxed conversation. Later, she took them for a swim in our pool. During my arrest that week, I received several cuts on my arms and chest, and some of the wounds were bandaged. I didn't want to get the bandages wet or risk getting an infection, so I stayed inside and watched some sports on TV. I didn't attach much importance to them, and, of course, I didn't suspect any tricks. After all, these two guys were her cousins. Returning to the living room, only a few minutes of conversation had passed when I heard them reminiscing about his swimming in our pool, the very thing I was remembering. Stella remembered that they had carefully hidden themselves in that part of the pool that was not visible from the windows. I had a hard time focusing on this episode. Has this just started at our pool, or have they done this before? Were they dating when Stella and I were married? Something just doesn't fit in my head. Not that it matters. They are 3 consenting adults, except that my wife was one of them. Their conversations revealed some additional information of interest. The cousins attended a state university about 50 miles away. After I heard them mention it, I remembered how they talked about it when they were here. Neither of them had classes on Tuesday or Thursday during the day. This explained several things. First of all, I now understand why Stella suddenly changed her work schedule this fall. She used to work 4 10-o'clock days from Monday to Thursday. She switched to 13-o'clock days that fell on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then there were 2 2-hour days that fell on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She said that the changes were introduced by management, but I suspect that it was all done by her request. She was home by noon on those days her cousins visited. That explained a lot. I thought the conversation in the living room was bad until I saw what happened in the guest bedroom. I'm not sure orgy is a strong enough word to describe what I saw. First, they helped each other undress. They then began intense foreplay on the bed. One of them pulled out a handful of condoms. I was surprised when Stella said, "Today, I have good news for you guys. I've been taking the pills for 10 days now. I'm sure we will all enjoy it." One of the cousins remarked that he thought she was trying to have children. She said, "Jake and I are officially trying to get me pregnant, but I've put it off for obvious reasons." Is Jake okay with this? How can he be against it if he doesn't know? He would be furious if he found out I was taking pills. If he found out, it would lead to some questions that I'm not prepared to answer. I don't think I could live without what the three of us do, but I also don't want to lose Jake and my marriage. Thus, what he does not know will not harm him. She continued to bemoan the fact that I seemed to notice a difference in her behavior. She mentioned that the last time we had sex, when we finished, I just headed straight to the bathroom. The time we used to spend in the afterglow of love has disappeared. She admitted that she enjoyed the afterglow as much as the sex. She missed this. She further mentioned that she avoided marital sex on Tuesdays and Thursdays, claiming that she was not in the mood. It was true. First of all, she was already completely full, but she also didn't want to risk me noticing something that she somehow couldn't hide. She admitted that I was clearly upset by her refusals. She never turned me down before she started going on these cousin dates. She then mentioned that I haven't even tried to initiate anything lately. She said it bothered her. There was a lot of sexual activity in this video. They did everything you can imagine. I am far from being an expert in this act, so I cannot give a name to these variations. When it was all over, there was nothing but ecstasy on her face. This disgusted me. There was very little conversation when they seriously had sex. Of course, sex for them is adultery for me. You would have thought that watching these numerous videos would be the main event that led to the end of my marriage, and it certainly played a big role. But it was the conversation that followed that ultimately sealed the fate of my marriage. Some of the things she said were the nails in the coffin. After watching the video, I called a divorce lawyer. I was able to get an appointment on Monday afternoon. All weekend, I avoided Stella in every possible way. She made several attempts to interest me sexually, but I did not give in. There were no kisses, no hugs, no private conversations. I'm done trying to save a failing marriage. Finally, she decided to take the bull by the horns. She spoke these 5 ominous words. "Honey, we need to talk." I was ready. She started by saying she knew something was wrong. I never kissed her again, let alone had sex with her. What did I do? "You seem to feel guilty about something," I replied. "I feel guilty for turning you away from me, but how can I feel guilty if I don't know what I'm guilty of?" she retorted. "Well, think about everything you've done, say, over the past few months. If you can identify something that might be bothering me, we'll talk about it. If you can't think of anything like that, then it must be my fault. Answer me this, Jake. Is something bothering you?" Did I mention anything, Stella? Did I say anything that made you think something was bothering me? No, but that's what you didn't say, and your actions tell me something is wrong, she sobbed. My God, woman, you just admitted that I didn't say anything to indicate that anything was wrong. I asked you to rummage through your thoughts to see what you did that might bother me, but you couldn't come up with anything. It seems to me that we are in some kind of crazy confrontation. With these words, I left the room and she continued to sob. We continued to simply coexist in the same house until we went to work on Monday. That day, I took a long lunch break to talk to my lawyer. I took the video and my evidence with me. After watching the video, he said everything was clear. Our state allows you to file for adultery. The video proves adultery beyond any doubt, he said. He took condoms from my evidence refrigerator and asked his assistant to take them to the lab. This will give us even more evidence. He indicated that the settlement would be a piece of cake. He said the documents would be ready by Wednesday. It was decided that I would personally serve her at home. No matter how much I hated what she did, I wouldn't enjoy humiliating her at work. I thanked him and left. I probably should have been happy to get rid of this bitch, but that wasn't how I felt. I felt betrayed, confused. I loved Stella with all my heart, but I will never be able to forget the words she said in that video. When I returned home on Monday evening, Stella was nervous. She apologized for not having prepared anything for dinner. I just grabbed my phone and ordered pizza. She said, "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm just so upset. I barely got through my work today. I'm just a wreck. Please forgive me for everything I did to upset you so much. We talked about this, Stella. As far as I remember, you can't think of anything that would bother me, and you don't remember me complaining about anything. I think there is nothing to discuss. But Jake, you treat me like a stranger. Please tell me why. When have I ever treated you poorly in any way? You don't touch me anymore. It's like you don't love me and don't want to have sex with me. I have a different impression, Stella. I remember taking steps and being stopped when you told me you weren't in the mood. This happened last Tuesday, the Thursday before that, and the Tuesday before that. Maybe you can't handle these 5 o'clock weekdays. I would expect you to be rested and eager to have sex. But what do I see? The only thing I know is that you never told me before that you weren't in a good mood during our marriage, until you started working 5 hours a day. Now let's move on to yours. 10 o'clock working days. You let me have sex with you, but you're somewhere else. It was all one-sided. It was more like you were doing your duty instead of participating in a higher act of love. I don't want either of them anymore, so I just avoid it. I no longer want to risk you hurting me and humiliating me. What are you talking about, Jake? Are you done with our marriage? Are you done with me? Are you going to leave me? It all depends on you, Stella. Everything depends on you. How can I do anything if you don't give me a chance? You treat me like a roommate, not like a wife. She began to sob. I turned around, walked over to my chair, and started watching a news program on PBS. She sat in her chair and watched it with me. Her phone rang. She said, "Honey, I have to answer." She walked into our bedroom and closed the door. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I knew everything was being picked up by my modified smoke detectors. I connected to the base station using my laptop, grabbed my headphones, and started listening to her conversation in real time. She was talking to her cousins. They confirmed that they both heard her and that no one else was there. She said, "I have to cancel this. Jake is acting very strange. I don't know what he knows, but he knows something. Are you sure he knows? Maybe he's just suspicious. It does not matter. Either way, he cut me out of his life. We're just roommates, not husband and wife. He doesn't touch me anymore. I need to change this." "Fine. We'll miss tomorrow. Maybe things will get better by Thursday." "You don't understand what I'm talking about. I'm not canceling tomorrow. I'm canceling all of this." "You know this won't work, Stella. You said it yourself. Now you live in 2 different worlds. You need them both." "I think so. But one of these worlds is falling apart, and I need to put it back together. This is what I have to do. Everything else is consumable, but not my marriage. Don't show up tomorrow or any other time unless you call ahead. You can visit me at any time, only in the presence of Jake. I have to admit that she seems to be trying to hit the brakes. However, sometimes it's too late to do the right thing. Yes, that's right. Too late. When I returned from lunch on Tuesday, I received a call from Stella. She told me she was no longer going to leave early on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She told her manager that the new schedule didn't work for her, so he changed it back to 14 o'clock days from Monday to Thursday. She just needed me to know not to expect her to be home when I got there. I said, "I thought you told me that management required this change." "I'm surprised they changed it back at your request, especially so fast." "I was surprised too," she answered. "I thought maybe they understood how upset I was, but they didn't. They said they had been thinking about bringing everything back for quite some time. My request only accelerated this." "Well, I'm glad it worked out. Thanks for letting me know." After we hung up, I began to suspect that this might be a cover for moving the orgy to another location. Maybe that phone call last night was a fake too. I knew what to do. I called her office phone. She answered after the second ring. I heard Mary and June talking in the background. She was at work, just like she said. I quickly came to my senses and said, "I forgot to ask. Do you want me to get us something to take out tonight?" "That would be great. Thanks for thinking about it." "No problem. See you later." It looks like her lies have turned into truths, as the song says. On the way home, passing by Marcy's gift shop, I noticed a beautiful sign in the window that read, "Avoid even the appearance of indecency." I slowed down to take a closer look. Marcy herself came over to serve me. It was probably because I was in shape. Apparently, she read my badge when she said, "There's a story behind this product, Officer Robbins." I told her I liked it because my boss, Sheriff Stevenson, often emphasized this point in our meetings. I said it would be nice to have it in our conference room. Marcy said, "The lady who sold me these signs had bought them from me just a few weeks before, and now she was selling them with tears in her eyes." Here's what Marcy had to say. The woman who sold the signs was named Janet. She was happily married to Brad. She met Steve at a conference organized by the company she worked for. Steve was an Army captain. As it turned out, the two of them had finished working together on a project related to the conference. As their project progressed, they became good friends. They had lunch together every day. When Brad saw them having lunch at the Hilton, he warned her to stop seeing Steve outside the office. She ignored this warning. In fact, not only did they continue to have dinner, but they even took a couple of day trips together. Soon it became more and more like an emotional affair. After the conference ended and Steve left, Brad was still upset. He initiated a confrontation involving their children. Janet swore that their relationship never became physical and that she did not commit adultery. She didn't know that Brad had hired a private investigator. Brad saw that at least Janet was having an emotional affair. Most likely it was adultery. Either way, Brad couldn't trust her anymore. This ultimately led to Brad agreeing to work overseas for his company for a month. He intended to use this month to think about Janet and his marriage. He needed some time alone to digest what he knew and decide on an appropriate course of action. Luckily, their children were both in college. They might be upset if his decision resulted in a divorce, but they would understand. While Brad was away, Janet happened to pass by a gift shop and saw 4 signs with a very appropriate message: avoid even the appearance of impropriety. In the deepest recesses of her mind, she admitted to herself that while she didn't have a physical connection, she may have had an emotional one. If she had followed these words of wisdom, she could have avoided a similar problem in the future. She purchased all 4 signs and placed them in strategic places around the house. One hung on the wall at the foot of her bed. It was the first thing she saw every morning and the last thing she saw every night. Unfortunately, these signs never became useful. She received a call from Brad a few days before he was due to return home. The call was not at all what she expected. Brad's first words to her were, "What are you playing at? While I'm here trying to figure out how to save our marriage, you're still carrying on with your affair." She said, "What are you talking about? I haven't had any contact with Steve since he left. He was supposed to go to serve in Europe. He's already there. What a long-distance romance, Brad. There was no romance before, and there is certainly no romance now." She sobbed. He replied, "Janet, I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. I decided to find out the latest news about your captain before making a final decision about use. I'm surrounded by military people here, and I know some pretty influential officers. I asked a question, and they gave me an answer. Your captain didn't go to Europe. He went to Fort Hood. So, let's see. It's about an hour from your house. How often does he make this trip? How often do you do it?" She wanted to tell him that she didn't believe what he was telling her, and that she never went to Steve, just as Steve never came. But Brad raised his voice and dominated the conversation. He didn't let her interrupt. He said, "Janet, I've accepted a full-time job here. I filed for divorce. I'm asking for our assets to be split in half, except for your car and house. You'll get them right now. I don't think you can get a better deal than this one. Go to your captain and celebrate tonight. Sign the papers when they arrive." With these words, he hung up. After crying for a long time, she called Fort Hood's Human Resources Department. Brad was right. Captain Steve Snow was indeed there. He had been there for several weeks already. Soon she was on her way there, to Steve. She drove back to the gift shop and sold all 4 signs. She did the only thing possible, but there were tears in her eyes. It meant the end of something good that she couldn't protect. On the day the divorce was final, Steve's ring replaced Brad's on her finger. It was "Goodbye, Brad. Hello, Steve." She insisted on waiting until her marriage ended. Now that Brad was officially out of her life, she resented the fact that he didn't believe her. Tonight, she could crawl into bed with him instead of Steve. It was Brad's call, and he did it without giving her a chance. She didn't need a sign to remind her of how fragile marriage can be. She'd never forget it anyway. She has bought into this and will do whatever it takes to protect her second chance at a lasting union. When she finished the story, I thought Marcy was going to cry. I asked her if there was a story behind all her products. She said it probably was, but she didn't know most of them. I took one of the signs and handed her my credit card and said, "I'll take this one, Marcy. It is ideal for our conference room." She pushed my hand away, saying, "Your money's no good here, officer." I shook my head, saying, "I don't want to start by violating the message written on this sign. I'm paying for this, Marcy." She reluctantly accepted my card. When I got home, I hung the sign so that anyone who walked through our front door could see it. "Stella will come in about an hour." Meanwhile, I connected my computer to the big screen TV in the office. It's time to shine a bright light on the darkness in our marriage. It's time to pull the plug. But first, she needs to know what she's missing. When she got home, she saw my patrol car in the driveway. Rushing through the door, she said, "Darling, you came home early." She stared at the sign. She seemed frozen in place. Concern was written all over her face as she pointed to the sign and asked, "Did you get this for me?" I told her that was my boss's favorite saying. I told her that this applies to me, and yes, this applies to her too. Then I asked, "Would you like to have dinner somewhere tonight?" She said that would be good. She just wanted to change out of her work clothes. She asked where we were going, but I told her it was a surprise. I knew this would be our last evening together. I made a reservation at a steakhouse where I proposed to her. It was a surprise, a good surprise, but not the last surprise I'll give her tonight. Yes, she was pleasantly surprised. We talked about how important this place was in our past. It brought back memories of so many things that meant so much to us. As our conversation continued, I found it difficult to maintain a good mood. I knew it was all ending, but she didn't know. She seemed to sense a change in me. She started to look worried. By the time we left for home, she looked scared. When we got home, I suggested we watch a movie in the living room. This seemed to ease her anxiety a little. She put in some corn while I was choosing a movie. We sat together on the sofa for two. My computer started streaming video to my big screen TV. In the first scene, the three of them were talking on the bed. They were all naked. She told them how good it had been since they stopped using condoms. My eyes looked up from the video and focused on her. She looked like she was in shock. She kept repeating, "Oh my God, no, 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 not this. Turn it off. Honey, please stop this." I inserted stop dots in several places in the video. I decided to skip the foreplay, blowjobs, and corny sex acts. I went straight to the beginning of the double penetration. At that moment, she rushed to the TV and pulled the plug out of the socket. I know it looks bad. It's bad, but not for you or our marriage. This is not cheating. Cheating is destructive because the cheater becomes distant from their spousey. I'm not in love with my cousins. I'm sure you know deep down that there is no danger of me leaving you for them. No matter how bad you think it is, it's just sex. It's not even close to love. I'm sure you understand that this does not threaten what you and I have. I love you more than ever. I was your wife in every way while this was going on. I shouted, "Is this really so? What about all the times you told me you weren't in the mood? You never did that until this whole thing with the cousins started. I did it out of respect for you, dear. I didn't want to give you any extra seconds. They would never be careless, I made sure of that, but I was determined not to give you even a hint. It was out of respect. Are you trying to convince me that those orgies you threw won't harm our marriage? Even if I could ignore these perverted, incestuous sexual acts, I cannot ignore the words you said. It was what you said next that doomed us. Don't you think sex is an important part of our marriage? Don't you think I place a lot of importance on sexual satisfaction?" Of course, Jake. I know sex is a big part of our marriage. Our sex has always been wonderful. You've always been a great sex partner, dear. You should never doubt your sexual prowess. I'm sure about it. I told her that I knew she was lying to me. As she continued to say how much she enjoyed sex with me, I turned it back on and advanced the video to the last point. It showed a conversation that took place after sexual activity. Stella was saying, "You guys ruined me for sex with Jake. After what we do, sex with him is just boring. He doesn't excite me anymore. Sex with him is more like inadequate foreplay. I have to fake every orgasm with him since I've been with you guys. When I'm in bed with him now, I just try to get it over with as quickly as possible. I'm trying not to screw up and show how uninterested I am in sex with him. Poor Jake. I think he understands that not everything is fine. The last time we were together, after my first fake orgasm, he wanted to come again. I tried to immediately immerse myself in the afterglow. I like the afterglow. It helps me show him how much I love him. He was adamant about another round, so I pretended again. When he emptied his second pack into me, he simply got out of bed without experiencing a moment of that afterglow that I have always treasured. I think I need to be a better actress. I better take it up a notch with him. It's going to be hard to put on a strong reaction to such corny sex, but I need to do it. If I don't, I might lose Jake. I can't allow this to happen. Her cousins asked if she was sure I wouldn't be interested in joining them. She said, "I've told you guys over and over again that my husband is not into any weird stuff. He doesn't approve of unconventional sex of any kind. He would never condone what I do, let alone participate in this. He must never find out about us. Once he finds out, I can say goodbye to my marriage." I turned to Stella and said, "You knew how I felt about weird sexual acts, but you did them anyway. For me, our sex life has always been an important part of our marriage. So now you are saying that your unorthodox, bizarre, unusual actions have clouded and ruined your enjoyment of sex with me. The banal sex you share with me cannot live up to your new expectations. How do you think I can stay in this marriage, knowing how you feel about my lovemaking? In the future, every time you deign to have sex with me, I will think about what you said. These words will never leave my head. Well, don't worry about pretending with me anymore. You don't have to." With these words, I opened my briefcase and handed her the envelope with the divorce papers. "You've been served. This is a typical equally divided document covering everything we have accumulated together. However, you should hire a lawyer to protect your interests. From this point on, the discussion should be between lawyers. The movers took all my things while we were having our last supper, so the obstacle known as Jake is now gone from your life. I will no longer stand between you and your lovers. I won't disappoint you with a banal goodbye kiss. Enjoy your freedom to fuck whoever you want. Goodbye, Stella." As I approached the door, she ran up and grabbed me around the waist in a bear hug. She sobbed. "I didn't mean anything by saying that sex with you was boring or trivial. I've already stopped what I was doing. It's over, darling. This will never happen again." I continued walking to my car, dragging it along the sidewalk. She didn't let go. Our neighbor, Sally, ran up and asked what was going on. Stella started telling her that we were going through difficult times. While they were talking, I took this opportunity to run to my car and drive away. I saw her in the rearview mirror. She ran behind my car and waved her arms. I turned the corner, and she disappeared from my sight and from my life. Stella tried to contact me twice. One day she came to my door and said that she had an idea on how we could get back together. I said, "Don't waste your time, Stella." She left in tears. The next meeting took place after the divorce became final. I was in my patrol car, stopped at a red light. She turned into the next lane. When she saw it was me, she waved. I ignored her. When the traffic cleared a little, she stepped on the gas and rushed through the intersection. The light was still red. I should have stopped her and given her a ticket. The cop in me wanted to do it, but the ex-husband in me didn't want to be forced to talk to her. The ex-husband won. It was the first anniversary of our final divorce. Kelly and I sat by the fireplace, eating popcorn and watching a movie on Netflix. She is a social worker. Our professional paths crossed several times in matters that were within our competence. We met each other at a holiday dinner for the poor. When we had finished serving dinner to the poor, we, along with the other waiters, sat down to our own dinner. Since we were working together, we decided to eat together. Our conversation was very pleasant, and we discovered that we have a lot in common. This conversation led to dating. Dating led to love. We are currently in an exclusive relationship. After our movie ended, there was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw a courier with an envelope. I assumed it was a work-related delivery. Having signed for the letter, I saw that it was from Stella. I opened it and started reading. Jake, for the last time, I want to say how sorry I am for ruining our marriage. When you left, I told you that I was done with my cousins, and it's true. When you left, I was devastated. I began to sink into despair. I knew I had to come to my senses. My way out of this quagmire was to call them and tell them that I was ready to pick up where we left off. They told me that they had already agreed on something with a girl named Freda. They then surprised me by saying that she would be happy if I joined them. They said she was a bi girl. Sensing my confusion, they told me that she often crossed the border between the hemispheres. I finally understood. I told them that I had never thought about having sex with another woman. I thought about it for a couple of minutes before I said, "What the hell? I'm willing to try anything." Soon, our team consisted of 4 boys and 2 girls. We've had a long season and played every game imaginable. I became the switch. I tried both sides of the plate and loved them both. After selling our house and moving into an apartment, I began to realize how much I had lost when you left. While I lived in our house, I was able to convince myself that you would eventually walk through that door. When I moved into the apartment, I already knew that you would never return. I started to lose interest in the team. I began to see it for what it was: absolute depravity. I finally quit the team. In fact, I was fired for failure to fulfill obligations. Either way, it's over. You know, if I had paid more attention in English class, I could have written a book, or at least an article about what I learned. First of all, the old adage about nipping things in the bud is true. I should have stopped this from the very beginning. I should never have allowed such depravity in our pool. Before this, I was completely satisfied with our sex life. Everything changed in just a few minutes in our pool. A fantasy was born, and it invaded the very center of my consciousness, and it consumed me. In truth, at that very moment, my ruin became inevitable. I needed more. When I got more, it was never enough. I lied to you when I told you I didn't mean what I said to my cousins, the words that bothered you so much. I'm ashamed to admit, but what I told them was the unvarnished truth. I meant every one of those words you hated. I was deep in the depths of hell, and there was no turning back. My marriage fell apart. My life is over. I will never be a wife again. I will never have a child to love. No little bundle of joy will ever call me mommy. All this has disappeared. There is no turning back. The only way out is to never go inside. There is another old saying that applies to us too, but this is wrong, although they say so. It says, "Actions speak louder than words." This is bullshit. It wasn't what I did that caused the marriage to be broken beyond repair. It was what I said. It was these words, which were indelibly imprinted in your mind, that determined my fate. We could never return to normal as long as those words stood between us. Words matter. I leave everything, both good and bad, and leave. I will never set foot in your door again. If I could go back and change everything, I would do it in a heartbeat. This doesn't happen in life. I wish you all the best. I hope that if you ever think of me at all, you will remember only the good times. We had it all, Jake, until I destroyed it all. In the process, I destroyed myself. Finally, with much newfound gratitude, respect, and, yes, abiding love, I say goodbye to you forever. Stella. Kelly was reading over my shoulder and became worried. She turned to me and said, "You know what it is, right? This is a suicide note. You can't let this happen, honey." I took her hand. "I completely left the game and don't want to come back." As Rhett Butler said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, Don't even think about listening to the next one.